Welcome to January MakerBox 2026. We wanted to feature a fun, lightly spring boho vibe that could be used all year long in your house. So we're gonna dive in step by step on how to make your box, take your projects that are just raw wood and turn them into this. So our maker boxes have two levels. We have our classic box, which is gonna include these two projects, and then you can add the deluxe box, which is gonna give you the third matching coordinating project. Remember, as a MakerBox subscriber, our classic memberships get 15% off all of your Paisley Grace purchases, and if you join the Deluxe Club, you get 20% off everything you purchase from Paisley Grace. So don't miss out on joining the Creative Club today. All right, welcome to your MakerBox for January 2026. I am a big proponent of inspirational quotes, and the things that you read become your mindset. And this one couldn't ring more true. I think it just is simple, but it hopefully is true for you too, that coming home is one of the most beautiful things. And it's just that day after a hard day, you come home and it just feels familiar and calm. And so I liked the simplicity of this to start off the year. And then it's important to remember that you can do bigger things than you even think you can dream of. So this little motivational sign just reminds us that never forget how wildly capable you are. And so it's a great reminder for yourself, or putting it in your kids' room, or putting it in a friend's room that you love. Like, one of my favorite things to do is go to people's houses and just leave little mementos. So I think that would be a fun one to do with this too. So let's dive in and show you how to paint this. So I'm gonna use the tweezers that we included this year, because it's gonna make it way easier for you guys to get all of the stencil stuff on and off. So I'm opening it all up. I'm gonna take my stencils and I'm gonna put them to the side for now, because we don't need them just yet. I'm gonna work on painting these pieces first, okay? So what I'm gonna do for a plan here is I'm going to do my lightest blue on the background. I'm gonna do my darkest blue for the wording, and then I'm gonna do my frame in oak, okay? So I'm gonna remind myself by kind of putting those paint colors by what I'm doing. So let's begin. So I'm gonna open up my light blue color, dip my paint in, and remember that I want to do in big streak motions, almost like you're putting on sunscreen. So I'm going to do all the way on, all the way off. If you see any paint pooling, just grab it real quick and spread it out even more. It's really important to do thin layers first, because by doing thin layers, it's going to allow the paint to dry in between those layers, and that way our stencil is going to stick nice and smooth, and we're not going to get any of those bleeds. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this all nice and solid. Now that I have one good coat, I'm gonna go ahead and do everything one more time. We'll put that board off to the side, and let's put our background layer on our middle piece. So I'm going to take my little piece, open up my dark blue paint, get a different small sponge, dip, scrape, and then go ahead and give it all one nice layer. And once I have one good layer on it, I'm gonna go ahead and do one more layer. Now you can choose if you want to leave your edges raw. Sometimes when I'm doing layered projects like this, I like to paint them the same color, because it helps them pop and make them look a little bit more rounded and textured coming off of the board. If you're having a problem with your paint just spreading around, dry in between your layers, and it's going to help you a lot, because wet paint is just going to push around, but wet paint will stick to dried paint almost better than it will the board. So my hands are getting a little messy. I'm going to take a baby wipe and go ahead and clean them off. All right. Clean hands and ready to go. Now I'm going to take my frame and I'm going to use my oak stain. Using another yellow sponge, dip, scrape, and stain a little bit goes a really long way. And we want that wood grain to show. So this is almost like that Karate Kid. I'm going to put it on and then kind of use a different part of my sponge to pull it back off. So slide it on, use a different part of your sponge to pull it off. And that's going to help it not puddle or get sticky. And then that way it looks like a nice, well-stained frame for us. Now I'm going to go back to this project here, and same thing that we've done in the past. If you have edges where it kind of went over, you can make them all one solid color, but because I'm going to be gluing the frame on top of this, I want it to just all look like wood. So I'm going to take just a baby wipe and just clean up my edges from where it went over. And that way everything will just look like one solid black laser burned edge and not have the bumps and some of that creates it a little messy. Art was never meant to be perfect. We can just always kind of touch it up. All right, so I got my edges nice and good. I don't really have to worry if any paint pulled away because I'm gonna glue this to this project. I'm gonna take a minute to blow dry both of these and I'll be right back. All right, so I have these really sanded. The next step's really important because when we paint, we raise the grain structure in a board. So we need to lay the grain back down before we try and apply a stencil to it. So I'm gonna use the sandpaper included in your kit, or if you have a sanding block like this, we're just gonna make nice even marks to press. Now, if you're not a fan of it ashing out, you can do a nice thin layer right back over it. But I personally like a little bit of the vintage vibe there, so I'm gonna let that go. Once you get that part done, do the same thing for your little piece. I'm just gonna do a light sand on it. And then I can take a wipe and kind of get that sandpaper off. So now it's time to apply our stencil. I'm gonna use my big one first, and I want to take the stencil. I'm gonna flip it over and push it all down, and then I'm gonna take the outer edge and get it so the blue stays down. Now, you don't want to just peel up high because then everything's going to come with it. So you want to take it, get it to lay nice and flat, and peel straight back. If we see anything coming up, push it forward, give it a crease, and then use your fingers to just roll that stencil back. Again, pushing it forward anytime something's trying not to stick to that clear. And then this white piece is off to the side. We don't need that anymore. Then I'm gonna take my stencil. It is sticky, so make sure you don't have any static electricity or anything going on here. And I'm gonna line the bottom edge up so I know I'm nice and straight. And then that bottom corner. So as long as you keep very light pressure, it usually will let you move it around. So now I'm gonna take the stencil, line up the bottom edge and the bottom corners, and then just let it kind of fall, push down my center line, and then push out. And that way it helps you prevent any wrinkles. Now I'm giving it a nice push all over. You can use a credit card, you just don't want to scrape really hard because we don't want to hurt that first layer of wood. Then I'm gonna take my top corner and peel this straight back. So the same concept we just did, just in reverse. Now we want all of the blue to stick onto the stencil. If I have any little bumps, that's okay. I'm just gonna use my thumb to push them down. Again, I really only care about where it's touching the stencil part, so that way I have a crisp edge. So now I've freed my transfer tape. I don't need that anymore. And I have my stencil. Now I like to work in pairs, so I'm gonna do the same thing with my wording. Again, I'm gonna flip it over, push it all down, take that white, and this especially because you have all those centers, watch, just peel slow, push forward. If they come up, then I'm pushing down hard with my fingers and kind of rolling it straight back. I find the closer you stay to the actual stencil, the easier it's going to be. Now we have freed that, so that's great. We're gonna flip it over, line up our edges, push down. And sometimes if you are on a dark color, it can be a little bit more resistant, so you might wanna push a little harder. Do make sure that your paint is completely dry because that can cause some issues too. So I'm just doing the same thing, peeling this, little motions, making sure that all of my blue sticks down, which is probably hard to see because it's blue on blue from the camera angle. So you can see the dark color does resist the stencil a little bit more. This is where if you had a credit card and you can kind of burnish it onto the board harder, you're gonna be able to get those pieces to stick down even better. All right, so we can put our transfer to the side. And now I'm just pushing down my stencil gently so all of my letters are stuck down, making sure all of my centers or counters are stuck down. And then if anything moved around, you can use your tweezers to just slide it where you want it to be and push it down a little bit harder again. Okay, so now we have our 2 projects that need to be stenciled. And you just want to choose what color you're going to stencil everything. So I'm going to keep this relatively simple because I want my color palette to just be neutral. We cannot use a stain on a stencil because it's too watery, it's just going to slide right under. So white or a light blue or the opposite is really my only options here. So I'm going to go ahead and use the white on the leaves, and I'm going to use the light blue on the wording. So we're going to go dip, scrape, unload, and then hop, 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 hop. You can see it almost looks like a nice chalk dusting, and that's exactly what I want because I don't want my paint to go underneath the stencil. So I'm going to go ahead and do a close-up so you can see what I'm doing. So you can see I'm building the layers slowly. I'm gonna go ahead and let this dry so my edges seal, and I'm gonna work on my bigger piece doing the same thing. So we said we're gonna do our leaves in white, so I'm gonna grab a different sponge, always dip, scrape, and unload. Now you're gonna see white takes a couple more layers, but that doesn't mean we wanna add big thick paint. If we add big thick paint, it's just gonna go underneath the stencil and cause those bleeds. Again, we don't have to worry about going over this edge because that piece of wood that we just painted is going to cover it up. So all I'm doing is dip, scrape, unload, having a very little bit of paint on my sponge and lightly dabbing over this entire project. The white's probably gonna take me about 3 layers to do, so I'm gonna do 1 layer, move on, do the whole project, then I'll come back and start where I began. It'll be dry by then, so I can go ahead and do my 2nd layer. By building the layers slowly like that, you're actually sealing the edges in between each layer, and it's gonna help you reduce the risk of bleeds. So I'm gonna go ahead and continue to do that, and then we'll come back together. So I have everything done once. I'm gonna go back through and do everything one more time. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and let that dry, and then I'm gonna come back to my first layer, and now that it's dry, I'm gonna add 1 more quick layer to that as well. All right, so I have a really good layer on this, so now I'm gonna peel it off. So we included tweezers in your kit this year as a little bonus. So I like to get the tweezers, push up the side, and then I'm gonna peel the first layer off. So satisfying. Now I'm gonna take my tweezers, and I'm not necessarily digging, I'm actually just almost using them as a push and a pinch. So I'm pushing it to free it, and then pinching it off the board. Right, so this one is done. That's awesome. I'm gonna put that to the side, come back to our big white one, and I'm just taking a quick double check to see if there's any of my leaves that aren't quite filled in. And I'm gonna give them 1 last little dab because again, wet paint's gonna stick to dry paint better than it does the board. So by kind of letting it dry in between my layers, it is helping, especially on the white because there's no primer in the white, so it seems to take forever to build up your layers on white. And you don't wanna do super thick because it will just slide underneath the stencil. So it is a little tedious, but it's worth it in the end, like all good art projects are. All right, so that's looking pretty good to me. Now that I have everything filled in, and I'm gonna take my tweezers again, get it started on the edge. I'm rolling it down and I'm just peeling up. I love that. And again, anything that sticks down, you can just use your tweezers to free the stencil mask. Looking good. Now I do have 1 little area here that has a slight bleed to it, and you might be able to see that. So what I like to do is I just pinch my tweezers together, and I just barely scrape away the paint where I don't want it, And because it's still a little wet, it kind of just comes right off and I don't even have to do touch-ups. So I'm not pushing hard. That was just a very, very light scrape, barely noticeable. And that way it just cleans up that edge just enough that it's not gonna bother me. Okay, now again, you can use the glue included in your kit, or if you have super glue or our Starbond glue, just add a bead of glue around the outside. And we're gonna glue on the center right in the void. Wood does like to have humid moments where it'll swell, bow, or then kind of come apart. So you do want to put a little bit of downward pressure on this while you're gluing it. I'm not gonna lie, I'm geeking out a little bit right now because this is totally gonna match my house. And I never bring projects home because the shop always has them, but I think this is coming home. All right, now I'm gonna do the same thing for my frame. Put a bead of glue all around the edges. You don't want to put too much because then it's going to go out the sides and under and it's going to look sloppy, but just enough that we get some good adhesion. I see a little bit of my fingerprint there, so I'm going to wipe it off before I put it down because it's way easier. I love seeing a project come together, especially from like design to implementation. And now Miss Harley is going to back up my camera a little bit so I can show you the grand reveal. My octopus arms. Oh, look at how good that was. Ta-da! It's so fun. All right, I hope yours turned out just as good. Let's paint our last project. All right, we're gonna dive into painting our second project for our maker box. So just like we did the first few of our background, we're gonna do the same exact pattern. Now I'm gonna rotate my colors just so it all looks really cohesive together. So I'm going to use a white background. I'm gonna dip, scrape, and really push that paint into the wood. Back and forth, back and forth. And remember, I don't wanna do a thick layer because then it's just gonna push wet paint around the board. So by building these layers nice and thin, we're gonna be able to really gain some traction. Now white is kind of a pain because there isn't primer in it, so we do want to let it dry in between each layer. So I'm going to put that off to the side. I'm going to grab my base and do the same thing and paint that nice and white. And just like we've been talking about, you can choose to do your edges, or if you went over like I did, you can grab the white and you can just wipe away any overage that you have. So I'm building my layers and whites just appear, and we're going to wipe down any of my overage on the edges so it looks nice and crisp. And that's just a pet peeve of mine. It might not bother you, and that's okay. So I have my first layer there. I'm gonna come back to the main project and give this a nice second layer, and you can see already that that second layer is taking the paint a whole lot better. Now, if you choose a different color for your background, you probably are going to get away with just 2 coats. Because I'm doing white, I'm probably going to have to do 3, maybe even 4. So I'm going to let those dry, and then I have my filler pieces here that are going to be the backer boards of the little stencils. For those, I want to go ahead and do an oak stain. Remember, as we talked about in the first project with stain, we're going to kind of wax on and then pull it off, and that's really gonna let that wood grain just shine and pull through. So I've eliminated a lot of the stain on there, so I just have a very little bit. Now that I've done that, I'm gonna go ahead and grab this one more time and give my layers, and then I'm gonna give everything a blow dry. All right, so now that we have it all nice and blow dried and we have a dark enough layer, I'm gonna take my sander and just give it a nice once over, and that's gonna lay our wood grain back down so our stencil is gonna stick nice and smoothly. Now I have my stencil, I'm gonna flip it backwards. I like to rub it down a little bit. And then I'm gonna take that white and peel it back. Now, if any of your centers start coming up, just crease it, roll slower, and just inch them back bit by bit so you have control that all the blue is staying down. None of it should be on your transfer. Then I'm going to take my board, flip it over and line it up. push your stencil down. I always like to do the center line first and then work my way out. Get it nice and applied. And then we're taking that clear layer and doing the same thing where we're inching our fingers back and making sure all the blue stays down on the board. All right, so now I have a choice to make. I could do navy or I could do blue, and I'm panicking and I'm not sure which one I want to do. So my answer in those moments is always both. And so we're gonna take my white sponge, I'm going to dip into my navy, unload, hop a couple times, and then lightly hop over everything on the project. So I'm gonna do an entire coat of navy first, and I'm building those layers slowly, just doing a light dab over everything, and that way it has a chance to dry and seal those edges. Now the lines won't matter too much, although they might shadow just a little bit. So we do want to still fill them in, but we are going to have a piece of wood going over those, so that's a little bit more of guidelines than they are actual parts of your project. Yep, scrape, unload. And the reason we unload is we're pushing that paint into the board, into the sponge, so it's giving a nice even coat all over the project. Dip, scrape, unload. All right, now that I have my dark layer, I'm going to unload my sponge, dip a little bit into that lighter blue, unload, and I'm just gonna kind of create a little bit of an ombre going from the outsides in, so almost like a radial ombre. So I'm just going around the outer edge just to create just a little bit of texture, a slight different color, gives it some pattern to it. And then we're gonna let that dry. And the trickiest part we will do is put our little tiny stencils on our little tiny pieces of wood. So we're going to pull back and do the same thing. Now these little guys are actually pretty easy. You just want to make sure that you don't lose your centers because they are so small. So never forget, you are and how wildly capable. I did those out of order, but it doesn't matter because we're just sticking our stencil. All right, so now we have our stencils on. I'm actually gonna do my wording in white. So I'm gonna dip a little bit in white, unload, and especially for these little letters, I like to put all of them together and just dab over it. But we wanna keep our paint really, really light because we're doing more detail work. So if we use too much paint, then we're gonna have a lot of touch-ups to do. And on stain, it can be a little bit more difficult. So I'm dabbing just like I did on the back part of the stencil. And once I have everything all covered, then I'm gonna take my tweezers and peel off the wording. All of your centers are gonna stay down, that's totally normal. Once you're done peeling the big portions, take your tweezers, and again, we're gonna kind of use it to push and then pinch. So you're not digging into your board, you're just kind of pushing it to get started first. And if you did have any centers that popped up, you can just use your tweezers to just kind of scrape away just a little bit of that paint. With the stain, a lot of times you don't even have to touch it back up, but it just kind of fits in there. And then we are ready to glue everything together. So I'm gonna put my projects to the side and all my paint to the side. I'm gonna grab that back board, use my tweezers to peel everything up again. Again, peeling those centers with the pushing and pinching method. And then you can use the included wood glue, or if you have super glue, just add a touch of glue to it and make sure that you glue the right words on the right stencil. Otherwise it's gonna read very weird. Never forget. All right, and then in looking at this, I like the crispness, but I wanna add just a slight bit of distressing. So I'm gonna grab my brush that's included, dip it in, heavily unload, and just kind of come across the edges and give it just a little bit of a kiss. And it's just gonna make those edges look just a smidge worn and give it some visual appeal. Then, if you went and it's a little bit too much, you can just take your finger and soften that. And pop it in your stand, and you end up with your project. Hope you enjoyed. All right, Deluxe Club members, this is your moment to shine. This is one of my favorite projects. I think it's gonna turn out absolutely stunning. And so let's dive in. Now, with the included tweezers this month, it's very easy to open these packages, which makes me happy. So I'm just gonna remove the shrink wrap, and then I have my pieces. So I'm going to take my leaves and know that they're a little fragile, so I'm gonna put those off to the side. And then I have my rainbow arches, we'll put those off to the side, and my backer board. Now I'm gonna keep this one nice and dark and a little stormy. So I'm gonna use the navy that's included in your kit. It's actually more of like an ash navy. And I'm going to dip my yellow sponge, scrape, and mash it onto the board. Now I want this back layer to be really dark and vivid. So I'm gonna do a couple layers of this where I have this almost wax on, wax off methods. So that way I'm not getting puddles of paint where it's kind of pooling. I'm using that to spread it all out nice and evenly. And that way it has a chance to dry in between each layer. Once I get the first layer done, because I've done it thin, I'm gonna be able to dip, scrape, and add in a second layer. Okay, while that's drying, I'm gonna put that to the side and I'm gonna grab my rainbow pieces. Now these are one of those where you could sponge them, but they're a big enough area that I'm gonna use my yellow sponge since it's already dirty and the same color I'm gonna do. So I'm dipping, and then I'm just going to add that layer on top. Now, sometimes when I'm doing projects like door hangers and they have a lot of crazy edges, I don't do my edges. But in this case, I really wanted to have that 3D pop effect. So I'm gonna paint my edges as well. And if you do choose to do this in a lighter color, you will have to do quite a few layers on your edges because of the laser burn. But we're gonna just round those edges and get them nice and dark as well. So every time I do a layer on the front, I'm gonna do a layer on the sides. All right, one layer done there. Let's move on to the next piece. And just like before, I'm gonna go ahead and do my inner layer as well, giving everything a really nice rounded finished look. Now let's keep on the fun. We're gonna grab that third layer and do a thin layer of everything there and make sure I get my edges for my third layer. And last but not least, let's grab that little baby layer and get it a nice coat as well. All right, now that I have everything done with one layer, I really want this to be a bold project. So I'm gonna go ahead and do everything that I just did one more time to really make it pop. All right, so I have all of these done with 2 really good layers. You can see my hands are a little messy. I would clean those before we start touching the white. So I love to keep baby wipes around so I don't always have to run to the bathroom to clean my hands. So baby wipes, or these are the sandy wipes, all of them are great, but that way you can have clean hands in between each paint color. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and let this component dry. And I'm just gonna put all 4 of those pieces off to the side. Now I'm gonna bring in my nice plain flower here. And you can choose to add a lot of details to this, and you could really make the project have a completely different feel with popping the flowers a different color or adding different colors or hues, making it lean more spring-like. I'm choosing to go for a very boho, chic, calm vibe. And my house has a lot of blues. So this project I might actually bring home. So we're gonna take the white, and now because this has holes in it, in other words, it's a more delicate piece, I'm actually going to use the white sponge instead of my yellow sponge because it holds a little less paint and it's gonna give me more control. So I use the clean surface here. I'm gonna dip, scrape, and I don't wanna add a lot of chunks of paint in here because it's gonna fill those details. So I'm always gonna unload once or twice on the paper towel, so I'm really pushing that paint into the sponge. And now with a light hopping motion, because I don't want to have to do all of these edges because that's gonna have a whole different look, I'm just going to lightly coat the top of this and build my white layers slowly. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep doing this motion over the entire piece until I have it all filled in. So now that I have everything done with one layer, I'm gonna go ahead and do a second layer just like I did the blue because I really want it to be bold and striking. So now I have my finished piece. I do have some paint on the edges and I can choose 3 methods. I can leave it be, and that's totally fine because most people aren't gonna see it. I can come through with a wipe while it's still wet and just kind of clean them up. And that's one of my favorite methods because it just makes it fade a little bit and it doesn't have to be so contrasty. And that way I don't have to go in and do all of these centers and all of the painting, but it still makes it look like a nice finished project. So I'm just going through with a wipe and softening my edges where maybe it bled over a little bit. And that way I'm not gonna really see them. And it gives them just kind of almost like a 3D effect. All right, so now I don't have any edges that look really crazy. Everything's kind of blended in. And I can choose if I need to add another layer or not, or if I think I'm good. So I have one little area here that looks a little pale. I'm gonna add some more white. And this is where you have the choice. You could come in and add light details of maybe some light blue flowers, or you could add in different colors. You could add in some green if you have it at home. But again, I'm gonna keep this one just really simple. So let's put that to the side. And now I'm gonna take my project and glue it together. Now you can see there's still the score lines here. So sometimes it does help to have like a flashlight going if you're struggling to see it. But I'm gonna take the glue pots that are included in my kit and I'm gonna run a glue line across all of this. Now for the purposes of this training, I'm gonna use our Starbond Stick Fast because I really like it. We do sell it if you want a bottle from home. And a little goes a very long way because they are very proud of this glue, but it sticks quickly and I have a very short attention span. So I'm gonna line up my outer edge. And then I'm gonna line up my second edge. And the same thing goes here. If you wanna add dimension, you could do a dry brush distress over the top of each of these. You could add a little bit of ombre to the colors of the rainbow. You could do different shades of blue, like lighten each layer up with a little bit of white. So it kind of has a semblance of a fade or an ombre. Lots of different options here. There are so many creative ways you could take this project to really fit your style, and whether you want it to look super modern or farmhouse, just to match what your vibe is. And so that's why I love projects like this, because they don't necessarily lock us into one specific decorating style. So now that I have that glued down, I'm just gonna put little dots of glue, whether you use the wood glue or super glue, over each of the branches of my flower here. Once I have that all dotted, if you got heavy, you can undo it on a piece of paper so it doesn't stick. But then I'm just gonna place this in the center of my project. All right, so now it's nice and glued on. I love the sunniness of this and I want it to be able to stand up. So I am going to actually paint the back for my own sanity because I like to put these on shelves. And then once I paint it, I'm gonna glue our stand to it. So I have a nice clean surface, and I'm just gonna give the back a nice quick layer. And because I'm gonna see it all, I'm gonna paint my stand too. But I don't need these necessarily to be perfect. It's just enough so it doesn't look like my fingerprints. Now when you glue these stands, you're gonna put glue on either side of the back and then place it in the center, but you wanna make sure that you get all the way down to the bottom, and that way the stand's gonna work, okay? So we have that in the center. It's gonna dry, and then you can leave this, if you're gonna wanna be able to fold it flat, you might not wanna glue your piece in, because then you can take it in and out. For the purposes of being at the shop in my house, I'm just gonna go ahead and run a beaded glue and glue my stand in. And so that way, I know it'll always stand up and I'm not gonna lose that piece. So we'll give it a second to dry and I'll show you the grand reveal. There we go. Your deluxe maker project is complete.